everybody. This is Stephanie Ruper. Thank you so much for tuning into the Naked Humanity podcast, where we take a deep dive into and try to understand what it means to be human in the modern world. Today is episode number 53X, and I am responding to a listener question about how to be objective. I think this is so important. We need to talk about truth and objectivity. I grew up with somebody very close to me and influential to me saying that A is A. And what he meant by this was the truth is the truth. And he always said this with respect to things that he thought, of course, were true. And I very early on realized that we all think we're right about everything. Now, we vary in degrees to how adamantly we think we are right. And I personally try very hard to be open-minded and self-corrective and looking to be corrected. But it's important to bear in mind that each of us has our own experience of us having access to truth and being objective. And this becomes a really big philosophical problem because then you realize like, well, wait, is there a truth we can agree upon? And I think in many ways there is, because we can test ourselves, we can use logic, we can use science, and we can work together to observe and derive principles that seem to be coherent with others, period. And so I don't think we should ever relinquish the pursuit of truth and relinquish the pursuit of objectivity. But insofar as whether or not I think it's a thing that exists, that, each of us, are we each true, or do we each have truth? No. No. Are we each right? And no, we're probably all wrong about everything to some degree or another. And I'm not kidding. I'm literally not. And even if you do have, say, the right view on something, you probably don't have all the justifiable reasons why, or right reasons why, or what have you. So one of the most important things that we can do for ourselves and our relationships and our communities and for making the world a better place is to strive to be objective, but to understand that we can never be objective. I had a woman on the podcast, I believe she was episode number 8. It was very early on. And she works a lot with biases and is very clear that thinking that you're not biased is one of the biggest and worst human biases. You cannot think that you aren't biased, because we all are. So the point is not necessarily to be objective, but to continually strive to be objective. So very quickly, it was a quick question. Somebody said to me in an Instagram message, actually a while ago, and I'm just getting around to it now, I'm sorry. How can anyone be sure that they are truly thinking for themselves and not being influenced by outside forces? That's a question. How can anyone be sure that they are truly thinking for themselves and not being influenced by outside forces? Well, they can't. That's the simple answer. They can't. You can't be sure. You can't be sure that you're not being influenced. Actually, it's impossible. We are all extremely influenced. We are environmentally embedded. We are born into specific contexts. We are formed by the environments around us. We are so networked within them. It's almost impossible to grasp just how much we are. Our moods are influenced by the colors around us and by our histories and by people's body language and so many subconscious things, that you can hardly even begin to imagine. And then like all of the wiring in the human brain. So I just what I'm going to do today is, instead of talk about the impossibility of being objective, which I think I have made abundantly clear already, I am going to dive into what I think are 4 important steps to take in the pursuit of being more objective, to try to make sure that you are being as objective as possible, which, to reiterate, I think is one of the most important things that you can possibly do. So if it sounds boring, please persist. Please persist in thinking about these ideas, listening to this podcast, thinking about these ideas, mulling them over, because if we are ever going to get ourselves out of yeah, all the various messes that we're in. We have to learn how to revise our ideas and learn from each other, and grow together and seek truth together communally. This is how science manages to advance. It works in communities, and we test ideas in various countries and labs, and uh, work together, check ourselves and check each other, to try to advance our understanding of what's going on in the world. And it's very important. So without further ado, there are 4 things that I want to talk about today. I've written them down in abbreviated form. 1, learn humanity. 2, learn self. 3, question self. 4, empathize. Learn humanity, learn self, question self, empathize. Okay. So number 1, learn humanity. I think it's important. This is why this podcast exists. The more you know about how humans work, the more you can understand how the people in your life and how you work. I'm baffled that other people aren't, that not everybody is totally fascinated with and obsessed with this question, because for me, understanding human nature is key to everything. We are these cultural animals that think and feel things, and we evolved in particular ways, and we're influenced in particular ways. And if we can get a grip on the forces that make us who we are, that make us experience life the way we do, then we can sort of then move forward, figuring out what to do about it. At least in my perspective. Because here's the thing: humans, we're animals. We're flawed animals. We're not designed to know truth. We have the ability to reason. We have the ability to use logic. We have the ability to talk with other people and try and confirm data, evidence, perspectives, what have you. But we evolved to climb social hierarchies. We evolved to try to find mates who love us. We evolved to raise children. We evolved to go to war with other human groups. Like, we evolved to do all of these things. And so we have biases. One of the most harmful biases that we all have is that we tend to hold a space for complexity and nuance in the views of our own group, but oversimplify the groups or the views of people who are different from us. And we tend to trust people in our own group more than people who are different from us, and so many things like that. We fall into groupthink patterns incredibly easily. And we do this even when we're trying not to. Yeah, it's so important to remember that we do this even when we're trying not to. And I kind of recently did a podcast on postmodernism, and I recommend listening to that one. I also did one on power back in 34X, and postmodernism was 47X, I think. And in these episodes, I talk about power and how one of the most revelatory and important philosophical realizations that's happened in recent years was in the 20th century, when Michel Foucault was like, wait, everything we say, all of our words, all of our truths, they are conditioned by power. They are conditioned by our institutions and our cultures and our positionality. We want, our desires, as subconscious as they are, formulate our truths, and we lean into truths that protect our group and protect our identity and protect ourselves. And that's a really huge problem. It doesn't matter who we are. Like, this is happening, and a really big problem. And so learn about biases, Google human biases and buy books on biases, and learn about human evolution and the history of our world and thought, and find how all of these things may be influencing you and the people around you are, constantly, all the time. And of course, never think that you have all the answers, because we don't, and that's an important piece of this. But rather just keep learning about it. That's step 1. Step 2, learn self. This is incredibly important. We are all born in a specific context. And so, people who are Democrats, usually their parents are Democrats. People who are Mormons, typically their parents are Mormons, although this is a church that works hard to do mission work and convert people. So maybe that was the best example. My point being that like the vast majority of people end up sharing the beliefs of their parents, of their upbringings, of their environments from their early lives. Not always, of course, um, but so much. And this is precisely because we grow up in these life worlds in which these things are true, and we develop sentiments and feelings and inclinations, all these like sort of vague things that are kind of ideas but maybe not ideas. And then when we hear the idea that resonates with these feelings, we're like, aha, that's it. That feeling like, oh, this person put words to something I've always thought, but I've never really been able to say. This is like resonance. I think so much about resonance. When we encounter ideas that resonate with something we've encountered before, or something we've believed before, or heard before, or longed for before, we feel resonance and we absorb it immediately. We're like a sponge. We're like, aha, I take that. But it's important to recognize that if you grew up in a different context, different things would resonate with you, and you would absorb different things very easily. In a Christian home, a Jewish home, whatever. It doesn't matter. It's very clear. And it's so hard to escape this. And even when you do radically change parts of your views, say you grow up in a Republican home, you go off to college, you become a Democrat, whatever, that kind of thing happens. Even when you change your views, there are important pieces that still have that same flavor of resonance, and we have to be aware of that. Or maybe you enjoy being contrarian, and part of your personal bias is that you're always contrarian, So step number 2 is figure out how you work. How can you be manipulated? What's really important to you? And when people press on those levers, what happens? Do you get outraged? You get upset? Can they manipulate you? What are your longings? What do you long for in life? How can that be manipulated? And what are your biases? What are you predisposed to believe? What are you predisposed to hate? Figure that out and then ask yourself, is this really rational? And a party to that is number 3, which is question yourself constantly. Come up against new ideas and don't hate them, but say, wait, can I take a step back from my own context and consider this as objectively as possible? You have to deconstruct your own world and then question it, right? They go together. Deconstruct yourself, figure out everything that's made you who you are, and then move into asking the questions, Oh, do I really have to believe this? Should I really believe this? What evidence is there to the contrary? I honestly, I spend more time reading things that are against my views than with my views, because I so much believe that it is through wide-ranging engagement that we can fully see perspectives on a question and try to discern as best we can what could be said to be true about it, what could to be said to be an objective position. And this step also meshes well with step number 4, which is empathize with others. Learn, practice, strip away your personal preconceived whatever. Just set it down for a second and say, okay, that person has an idea and I don't like, but why don't I like it? And why do they like it? There's 2 important pieces of that question. Why don't I like it? And why do they like it? Is it because of their religious background? Is it because of a course they took in college? Is it because they have particular thoughts or feelings about being male or female or what have you? There's so many different things that go into that influence our beliefs, so many different kinds of longing, so many different kinds of, power structures and all that sort of stuff. Identity is huge. Listen to this podcast, and I'm constantly saying this, but it's so important. I also did an X episode on political differences early in the 40s, I think. And that really delves into this question of what happens when you encounter ideas you don't like. You shouldn't throw them away. You shouldn't argue why they're wrong. You should say, okay, why does this person like this idea? Can I set myself aside and see why it works for them? And then we can have a conversation together because we're trying to understand one another. And then you sort of come together from opposite ends as opposed to just shooting arrows at each other. I think it's incredibly important. And these are really, I think, 4 crucial steps to being as objective as you can. Again, we will never be fully objective, but try, learn about humanity, learn about yourself, deconstruct yourself, question yourself, and do that in the context of constantly engaging ideas that are different from you, being willing to consider them, setting them aside. It's like empathy with your thoughts and with your feelings. It's just getting in other shoes all of the time. This is growth, and this is honestly as close to objective as we can get. So I'm going to leave it there. Let me know if you have any thoughts about these 4 steps, if you would add to them, if you dislike them, if you have certain ideas about truth. I would love to hear them. I know I have some friends who have some very, very firm ideas about truth. So please do get at me on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, at Stephanie Ruper. And if you have a question for this podcast, please do write in. I love responding to these questions. You can just shoot me a message on Instagram or Facebook, or you can submit an anonymous question at stephanieruper.com/form. And you can get that link in my Instagram profile. Of course, if you would like to drop a review of this podcast, I would be hugely grateful. That's how we reach more people, insofar as they may be looking for this kind of conversation and material, for better or for worse. Thank you again so much for joining me. I'm Stephanie Ruper, and this has been Naked Humanity, episode number 53X. I will talk to you next week.